Richardson for New England Boating. It's late spring, and that means it's black sea bass season here in southeastern Massachusetts. We're on Buzzards Bay, and the sea bass are thick right under us right here in the middle of the bay. This is a great fishery. It's fast, it's easy, kids love it, and you don't, as you can see, you don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to enjoy it either. We're going to walk you through all the steps involved in black sea bass fishing so that you can enjoy this great fishing too. Let's get started. Now, black sea bass typically move into Buzzards Bay around mid-May, and the fishing is tremendous right through the month of June, with late May through mid-June being prime time. That's when the big bumpheads, we call them, that's the male sea bass, move in, and you can catch them over open stretches of rocky bottom. I typically fish areas from 20 to 35 feet. But the fish move around depending on the bait and the spawning aggregation. So you're gonna have to move around a little bit out here. Another tip is, hey, look where the rest of the fleet is too if you're desperate. Well, you don't need real fancy or expensive gear to pursue black sea bass. You can use spinning gear, that's fine. But I prefer a light conventional outfit like this one. It's a conventional revolving spool reel, level lined reel. It's filled with 30-pound test braided line. I have a 7-foot conventional graphite rod. It's a very sensitive rod, so it lets me feel the lure tapping bottom, and it lets me feel when a sea bass has sucked in the jig. Well, the terminal setup for black sea bass is pretty simple too. I basically tie a small barrel swivel to the end of the braided line. Then I tie on a 3 to 4 foot 50-pound test monofilament or fluorocarbon leader. Doesn't really matter in sea bass fishing. And this is an optional thing you can do. It's a dropper loop off of the main line. It's maybe about 3 inches long, and that allows you to put a small fly or a small jig like I have on the leader above the main jig. Now the main jig is a 2 to 4 ounce bucktail or rubber tailed jig like this one. This is called a Jackpot Digger Jig, and I really like these jigs. They've got this special design here, this weighted head that allows them to tap bottom, kicking up puffs of sand like a wounded squid or bait fish, and the sea bass love it. I'm using a chartreuse one to start with, but white's another favorite of mine, like a pearl color. Also white and blue and a chartreuse, always good. So this is a great one, Jackpot Digger Jigs. Other jigs I like to use include the Spro bucktail, but again, real simple. Just tie them directly to the eye of the jig with a clinch knot or a uni knot or whatever knot you want to use. Some people prefer a loop knot because it allows the jig to swing more freely, but again, I found it really doesn't matter too much with black sea bass. They're not too fussy. Now, a lot of times the black sea bass are so aggressive that they'll hit a plain jig, or even a plain diamond jig sometimes works. However, always hedge your bets by bringing some natural bait. I bring squid because that is what these guys are feeding on down in the bottom. And I will show you how to prepare a squid strip for your jig right now. First of all, I cut off the head of the squid. I set that aside because you might need that as backup later. But basically you're going to want to use the mantle of the squid as your strip baits. So you open it up with the knife, toss out the middle parts as you don't need those. And then you have a nice big flat strip or piece of squid to make your strips from. Now I like to make little triangular strips, maybe 2 to 3 inches long. You don't need very much to put on your jig. And then I split the tail of it so it'll give it a nice fluttering action when it's on the jig, and also it'll be less likely to hang up or snag on the jig hook as you're jigging it through the water. Okay, once you set up over your sea bass spot, you've got your jig rigged up with some bait, you're ready to start fishing. Simply lower it down to the bottom. Once it hits bottom, simply jig it up and down like this. You want to keep your rod tip fairly low to the water so you're ready to set the hook when you feel the bite of the fish. You want to make sure that your jig is always tapping bottom every time you lower your rod tip, because, oh, there we go, because the fish are going to be right there on the bottom waiting to eat it. So ideally you want to pick a day when the tide and the wind are in the same direction, which is going to allow you to cover a lot of bottom if you're drifting. I like to drift to find a concentration of fish rather than anchor. Once you do find a concentration of fish, mark it on your chart plotter so you can make repeated drifts over that same area. Now I got a fish on right there. So I'll hit my man overboard button on my plotter and I'll mark it, and I can just come back to that same spot, drift over it again and again. You can also drop anchor like a lot of people do if you happen to be in a really, really productive area. But you're really looking to drift along and try to find a concentration of rather large fish, because they tend to hang out together. Now that's a nice sized fish right there. There we go. Look at the colors on his head. They're like almost tropical looking. They have the beautiful iridescent colors to it, and then you've got that bump on its head, hence the nickname bumphead. So when you're bringing these fish in, it's important not to try to horse them in. You want to gently lift the rod and reel down. They have pretty soft mouths, so they can pull out. The other thing you're going to want to bring is a net, because you got a nice fish on. You don't want to be lifting them up out of the water by the line. Now, a good thing about a nice light wind day like today is that you can get away with using lighter jigs. 2-ounce jigs on a day like today is just perfect. If you have a windy day and it's pushing you very quickly across the bottom, you're going to have to go with a heavier jig, maybe a 4-ounce, even a 5-ounce or 6-ounce sometimes. But ideally, you want a nice light wind and a current in the same direction. If you have current opposing the wind, you're just going to sit there in one place. And you might even have to do something called power drifting, where you use the engine to sort of bump you along and cover ground to find the fish. And again, don't be afraid to move to a new spot. If you're not catching fish within the first 10 minutes, keep moving until you find a pocket of fish. Find the depth zone where they are. And don't be afraid to go and strike out on your own too. You may be in the middle of a fleet. You figure everybody else is in the right spot. Go find a spot of your own. You may just uncover a huge concentration of them and have them all to yourself. Now, if you're fishing on a really windy day, or the wind springs up while you're out here and you just can't hold bottom with the jig and your boat's just cruising along just too fast to fish, you can make what I call a poor man's sea anchor. And it's basically a 5-gallon bucket, and you can put a bridle on it like this and throw it out behind the boat and tie it off amidship somewhere. And this will slow down your boat enough so that you can hold bottom with your jigs. Of course, you could also invest in a real sea anchor if you wanted to, but this will do the trick on a small boat. So there you have it, Buzzards Bay black sea bass fishing at its best. Get out here in May and June and have some fun with these awesome fish. They're a lot of fun to catch, family friendly, and also good eating. I'm Tom Richardson for New England Boating. Thanks for watching.